Hello and welcome to Real Obscure. I'm Kevin H. Shaw, and this week we're looking at a lost Lovecraftian tale of madness, murder, and modern art murals. From 1974, it's the cult classic Messiah of Evil. Messiah of Evil was written, produced and directed by the husband and wife team of Willard, Huyck and Gloria Katz. If those names are familiar to you, it's probably because they were frequent collaborators with George Lucas. They were responsible for co-writing the script for American Graffiti, performing script polishes on the original Star Wars, and scripting Indiana Jones and the Temple of Doom. They also co-wrote Howard the Duck, but let's not hold that against them. Production began on the movie in 1971, with the pair co-writing and co-directing the feature. However, due to issues with the payment of cast and crew and the producers cutting the budget, Huyck and Katz quit the production and returned to work with Lucas on American Graffiti, leaving Messiah of Evil incomplete, at least according to some. Huyck claims the movie was indeed completed, whereas Katz stated 2 scenes, including the movie's climax, were never filmed. The movie was eventually released in 1974, with an added bookend of the protagonist Arletty, played by Mariana Hill, providing a voiceover in an attempt to tie together some of the threads left dangling due to them not being filmed. According to Anitra Ford, who plays Laura in the movie, "Toward the end of filming, investors pulled their money out, and the film was never finished. A Frenchman bought the unedited footage, edited it, and released the movie." Now, I'm not sure who this Frenchman was, but whoever he was, we owe him a huge debt of gratitude. The movie's aforementioned protagonist, Arletty, is played by Mariana Hill. Hill had a long and successful acting career, appearing in the Elvis movie Paradise Hawaiian Style, High Plains Drifter, and The Godfather Part 2. She also worked extensively in television, appearing in the Star Trek episode Dagger of the Mind, plus guest starring in Mannix, Batman, and Mission Impossible. Michael Greer plays Tom, the movie's male lead. Greer was one of Hollywood's first openly gay actors, and a trailblazer in his performances as an actor and a writer. He was also a successful cabaret performer, with an act that included drag performances and celebrity impersonations. Indeed, his Bette Davis impression was so good he actually dubbed some of her lines on The Dark Secret of Harvest Home. The aforementioned Anitra Ford stars as Laura, one of Tom's travelling companions. She's probably best remembered as one of Bob Barker's models on The Price is Right, but also has a number of TV and movie credits to her name, including appearances in Invasion of the Bee-Girls, the 1974 Wonder Woman TV movie, and The Longest Yard. Rounding off the main cast is Joy Bang, who plays Tony, Tom's other travelling companion. Bang had a series of TV and movie roles in the early 70s, including Hawaii Five-0 and Mission Impossible, and the Woody Allen comedy Play It Again, Sam, before retiring from acting in the mid-1970s. So what's it all about? Well, the film opens with a man, played by Walter Hill, yes, the Walter Hill of the Warriors and Streets of Fire fame, running in terror along a deserted street. He takes refuge in the backyard of a young woman, who gently caresses his cheek, and as he kisses her hand, proceeds to slit his throat. Now, some versions of the movie feature a 1970s easy-listening romantic song at this point. If you're watching the version with that song, please stop and find a different release. Not only is this cropped, but it's also a terrible print, and it even omits a key end monologue. Anyway, the title card appears, and then we cut to the aforementioned wraparound voiceover by Arletty, played by Mariana Hill. which is delivered over a wonderfully delirious, hazy shot of her slowly making her way down a backlit corridor. She speaks of how nobody believes her, how they say she's insane, and that the people need to listen because she knows what's coming. That they are waiting at the edge of town, peering around buildings at night. And then she delivers the chilling line, "No one will hear you scream," in a performance which I'm sure destroyed her voice for the rest of the day. And at this point we flash back to the beginning of the events that led to her current situation. We see Arletty driving at night, and in a voiceover she explains how she went to Point Dume to find her father, the artist Joseph Lang. He would visit the seaside town to paint, but when her mother passed away, he remained there. The two stayed in touch through letters, but recently his writings became unhinged and eventually just stopped. We're then introduced to Joseph, Arletty's father, who acts as a second narrator. As she drives, he speaks of how he has little time left, but that she must not attempt to contact him or come looking for him. This device is used throughout the movie and is interesting because, as these entries are from a journal she finds later, it means Arletty is recounting the tale of the past through the lens of later knowledge. Arletty's father Joseph is played by Royal Darno. Darno had a string of television credits to his name, but is probably best known to more modern audiences for his roles in Ghoulies 2, House 2 and The Dark Half. He also appeared as Judge Sternwood in the second season of Twin Peaks. And interestingly, he also provided the voice of Abraham Lincoln at Disney's Hall of Presidents. Next time you hear somebody doing an Abraham Lincoln impression, chances are they're actually doing a Royal Darno impression. So Arletty arrives at a gas station where she's shocked to find the attendant firing a revolver into the night. The attendant is portrayed by Charles Diakop, another one of those "oh it's him" actors that appeared in 60s and 70s television. His credits include the Star Trek episode Wolf in the Fold, Land of the Giants and The Fall Guy. He also had a fairly extensive movie career, appearing in Butch Cassidy and the Sundance Kid, The Sting and Maverick. Seeing Arletty's arrival, he pockets the pistol and goes back into business mode, refueling the car and wiping the windshield, as though nothing is wrong. When a strange howling emanates from the darkness, he dismisses it as stray dogs, an explanation Arletty expresses her doubts over. He reiterates it must be dogs, because he's hunted everything in those woods and nothing but quail and rabbits are there, and rabbits don't make that sound. It's a fantastic introduction to the weirdness of this movie, with the attendant attempting to convince himself as much as Arletty that it's just stray dogs, and also one of the many nighttime scenes featuring desolate, empty spaces. There's a silence, both audio and visual, to so many of these scenes where the emptiness and absence of people takes what should be familiar locales and makes them so unheimlich and so unsettling. Arletty asks for directions to Point Dume, and the attendant questions why anybody would want to go there, as it's deader than hell. Before Arletty can question him any further, a truck rolls onto the forecourt. Warily, the attendant goes over to offer service to this new arrival, ignoring Arletty's attempt to pay. The driver, credited as Albino Trucker, is played by Bernie Robinson. His presence absolutely commands our attention, and he has this wonderful performance that is so alien as he just stands there, stiff and motionless. As he's gassing his truck, the attendant lifts the tarpaulin in the truck's bed and discovers a number of bodies. Arletty attempts to pay for her gas, but as the attendant realises that she is in danger, he simply dismisses her attempts to pay and then demands that she get out. Thankfully, she does the sensible thing and leaves. We cut to some time later with the attendant now working on the underside of a vehicle. But as he does so, the lights slowly begin to go out in the workshop. Narrowly escaping as the car is lowered from the hydraulic lift, he is shocked to see a passenger within the vehicle, who leaps out and attacks him. We cut to an exterior shot of the gas station as the lights go out one by one while the attendant screams. The next time we see him, he is dead, covered in blood, and suspended from the lift. Now this whole scene does a great job setting the table for what's to come. It's a wonderful combination of empty spaces and equally silent soundtrack, surreal, dreamlike events, and lashings of shocking blood. It's barely started, but it already has a wonderful nightmarish quality that permeates through the entire movie. We return to Arletty, who has arrived at her father's beachside home. And here we encounter one of the first of many scenes of waves at night crashing upon the beach. This theme recurs throughout the movie, and although it's important to the movie's plot, it also has ties to the symbolism of dreams and waves. It's believed that to dream of waves and water represents change and the stirring of emotion. The movie presents itself almost as a nightmare, so I don't think this dream symbolism is a coincidence, and it's very deliberate. Arletty breaks into her father's house, and we're introduced to another character, in the form of her father's artwork. The walls of his home are covered with murals of everyday people and locations, yet they're somehow transformed into the sinister. Groups of people, usually dressed in suits, stare from the walls. Forced perspective and three-dimensional objects blend seamlessly, as if the paintings are somehow coming out from the walls. Oddly angled mirrors reflect the art and our protagonists, reflecting both on a single plane, and in many places the lighting palette matches that of the paintings, making it difficult to distinguish where one ends and the other begins. The art direction by Jack Fisk and Joan Mosine, who provided these paintings, is truly stunning, with Phelan Bishop's experimental electronic score combining to give these sequences a genuinely creepy atmosphere of dread and paranoia. Arletty finds her father's journal and begins to read. Again, we have Joseph's narration, setting the weird tone, explaining how he hasn't slept for 3 nights, how he is plagued by images in his mind that he can't explain, and most chillingly, of his nights wandering alone in the town, where he sees creatures he knows cannot be there, and the pale-faced strangers he sees gathered on the beach, staring into the darkness of the nighttime sea. There's some incredibly haunting imagery in Joseph's journals, something I feel really adds to the literary leanings of this movie. And it's not just exposition, it's mood. It really enhances the whole atmospheric feel of the movie as a nightmare. The next morning, with her father still missing, Arletty goes to visit the local art gallery, where again we encounter a wonderfully surreal sequence in which the art dealer is an elderly and completely blind woman. She appears to be mute, snapping her fingers to call upon another dealer, and then tapping the palm of his hand to convey her message. This younger art dealer explains that they are aware of her father's work but have never met him, and that earlier today somebody else was asking about Joseph. Strangers, as he puts it, as he gives her the address of their motel. And so Arletty makes her way to the motel, where she finds Tom reclining on a bed with Laura, recording a conversation with Charlie. Charlie is played by Elisha Cook, who you'll recognise from The Maltese Falcon, The House on Haunted Hill, and Rosemary's Baby. Charlie proceeds with a haunting monologue as he sits in a beautifully framed, eerie flat shot of him speaking directly to us through the camera. He recounts his birth and how his mother was going to feed him to the chickens, in an utterly bizarre matter-of-fact manner. Arletty interrupts, but Tom silences her and asks her to sit before Charlie continues, discussing something from his father's childhood he called the Blood Moon, and how when this happened, men could do horrible things like animals. Again, Charlie is interrupted, this time as Tony enters the room from the bathroom, complaining about being hungry. Arletty is taken aback when she realises that Tom, Tony and Laura appear to be some kind of throuple or a menage a trois. Tom hushes her and prompts Charlie to continue. He explains that 100 years ago the moon began turning red and progressively became redder, and as it did so things became worse. People started bleeding, children were seen eating raw meat, and he described the town as festering like an open sore. These events ultimately led to the night where they came down from the canyon, the recollection of which begins to disturb Charlie to the point where he cannot continue and makes his excuses, leaving with the bottle of wine Tom gives him. Arletty questions Tom about her father, and he explains that as they were passing the art gallery that morning, they saw some of his works in the window, works that were later removed by the time Arletty arrived there. Finding no more information here, Arletty leaves, but is accosted by Charlie, who explains that he's not mad, that he fakes it to keep them fooled, and as long as he drinks and sleeps on the sidewalk like a dog, they'll leave him alone. When Arletty asks about her father, he explains that she has to kill him, but not bury him in the ground. Put fire to his body is his advice, as Arletty stares at him in disbelief. Arletty spends the remainder of the day trying to find more information about her father, but finds nothing. We cut to her reading Joseph's journal, and he picks up the story, as he recounts a phone call with Arletty, where he could not speak for fear of his changed voice terrifying her, of how his memory is going, and how his thoughts constantly dwell upon death. Later that night, Arletty is awoken from her sleep by a strange sound. Investigating, she discovers Tom, Laura and Tony are at the house. Earlier that afternoon, the body of Charlie was found, half-eaten. As they were the last people to speak with him, the motel owner kicked them out, and they were left with nowhere else to go. Arletty allows them to stay, but in her narration explains that she's not sure why. It's as if some outside force were at work. Again, this feeds into the entire nightmare logic of the movie, where, like a dream, events unfold without your agency. Now I am going to stop the synopsis at this point, because this is a movie I really want you to experience for yourself. It's a superb example of how left-field filmmaking can produce some truly interesting and exciting cinema. Yes, it explores themes and it's arty, but it does this without sacrificing the scares or the elements of horror. The whole production has a dreamlike quality to it. If you're a fan of David Lynch's more abstract works, and if not, why not, then you'll be right at home here. There are long periods of silence during conversations, characters seem to have motives we don't understand, and there's a quality to proceedings that you feel much more than you understand at times. And that's fine. This isn't a movie that lays out a heavily plotted storyline, yet at the same time it does have a strong narrative driving it. It's the execution of these scenes within the story that adds so much of the welcome weirdness, but for all its art house trappings, it's still quite visceral at times, including some scenes of flesh-eating and bloodletting. It's only now, decades after its release, that Messiah of Evil is being recognised as such an important and influential film. It may borrow some of its fantastical realism from Night of the Living Dead. At one point it was even released as Return of the Living Dead, which is another movie I'll come back to at some point. But also, in turn, it clearly influenced Romero, with the infamous supermarket scene being a commentary on consumerism and also in the behaviour of the shoppers. It's also probably one of the best non-Lovecraftian movies ever made. People tend to think of Lovecraft's writings as featuring eldritch blasphemies from outside of space, but he actually wrote as much about madness and zombies. Yes, Herbert West Reanimator is a remarkably grisly zombie tale if you actually take the time to read it. And the movie, with its ocean themes, a dark inheritance, and a small town where nobody is quite what they seem, are ideas he explored in his novella The Shadow of Innsmouth. Indeed, Charlie is very much in the mould of Zadok Allen, and provides an informative ally that expands upon the story's background in both tales. And I'd be very surprised if John Carpenter hadn't seen this film, as its exploration of oncoming madness, warped reality, and small-town horror leaves its fingerprints all over In the Mouth of Madness. The movie is available to stream on a variety of platforms, but the free versions tend to be cropped, include the odd romance song, and also are in a very poor state of repair. I'd recommend picking it up on Blu-ray. Radiance did a great version, which features not only a great picture quality and sound, but also has a number of behind-the-scenes articles and essays on the movie that are well worth your time. Now, if you'd like to learn more about the movie, then get ready, as we are about to enter the spoiler zone. Now, normally I'd give a full synopsis of the movie's ending in the spoiler zone, but with Messiah of Evil I'm doing something a little different. Mainly as there's a lot to unpack still, but also because a large part of this movie's magic comes from its visuals and art direction. However, I will touch on a few points, including a couple of the movie's most famous and effective scenes of horror. I just want to discuss how masterfully this movie is crafted, and how, despite the production issues, it's still a fantastic watch to this day. The first of these scenes comes when Laura attempts to leave Point Dume. She finds herself in town, alone at night, until she sees a lone woman who, despite Laura's pleas, refuses to stop. She follows her across an abandoned parking lot into a supermarket. It's something this movie does so well, this sense of things that should not be, from the horror of the residents, which we'll touch on in a moment, to the scenes of deserted streets, or a fully illuminated supermarket with an empty parking lot and emptier aisles, and this eeriness is juxtaposed with the mellow and calming sounds of the supermarket's piped muzak. It's truly chilling. As Laura proceeds through the aisles, she spots the woman she followed, and then a man, both of whom simply stare at her. She rounds a corner and is shocked to see a group of locals, all dressed in suits and Sunday best, tucking into pieces of raw meat directly from the coolers. Again, it's this wonderful clash of visuals, of smart, well-dressed, mostly middle-aged folks, the establishment, slurping down raw liver, chewing on bones, and even picking pieces of meat from their teeth. They've become animals. Now the locals are clearly no longer human. It could be argued they're zombies, but the movie leans more into the idea of cannibalism and the way the consumption of forbidden flesh transforms the diner. But unlike regular zombies, they act with purpose, often as a group, and they also eat each other when the opportunity arises. Is this some kind of commentary on the establishment? Or is it just a really creepy idea? That's what's so great about this movie, as both could be applicable. Anyway, the locals descend upon Laura, and we cut to scenes of empty aisles, with her screams echoing over them. It's an absolute masterclass in creating a disturbing atmosphere of horror, without actually showing the horror itself. Now the second scene I want to mention is the cinema sequence. Tony, bored at the house, heads into town to catch a movie, walking into the theatre, which is playing Kiss Tomorrow Goodbye, clearly a bit of foreshadowing for what's to come, where she buys a ticket, helps herself to some popcorn from the deserted foyer, and then picks out a seat in the almost empty auditorium. But as the lights go down, a man seated in the front row turns to stare at her intently. The movie begins. It's a western called Gone with the West, which is actually a movie that was released in 1975. Now, as Messiah of Evil got its premiere at the end of '74, quite how Gone with the West ended up in the movie is a mystery. I don't see any connections in terms of shared producers or distributors, so this really is an oddity. And it begs the question, when was this footage added? We only see Tony responding to something on the screen, so it's possible that there was originally a different movie showing. I'm sure the only person who knows the full story is our mystery Frenchman. As Tony stares at the screen, the theatre doors open, admitting another patron. Then another, and another. One by one, the seats behind her are occupied by the new arrivals, until the entire theatre is almost completely full. Eventually, two of the new arrivals sit on Tony's row, and as she turns to face them, she sees their eyes are bleeding. She attempts to leave, rising and turning to see the amassed locals for the first time. Panic grips her and she flees, but discovers her way is blocked. She runs onto the stage and, against the plain white backdrop of the movie screen, is killed by the locals. Again, it's a sequence that just builds the tension so slowly, hinting to us that something isn't right, and as it proceeds, has us nervously enraptured, willing Tony to just turn around and see what's going on behind her as the suspense builds. And it pays off wonderfully, with the panicked Tony attempting to escape, but succumbing to the locals. And then one other point I want to discuss is a scene in which Joseph fills in more details about the curse of Point Doom and its origins. 100 years ago, he recounts, a hunter met the Dark Stranger, who's played by Michael Greer in a second role. The Dark Stranger claimed he was a preacher who'd crossed the mountains with the Donner Party. He spoke of how he'd eaten human flesh and how he'd found a new master. The locals later found the dying hunter, half-eaten as if he'd been attacked by a beast. He explained that the Dark Stranger said he was here to spread his new religion, and that he'd walked into the sea, vowing to return in 100 years. Now, it seems in early drafts Tom was intended to be some kind of relative of the Dark Stranger, or his modern incarnation. In a pre-release interview, Greer said that he'd be playing the Devil's Son in the movie, and that there was a dream sequence that recounted the story of the Dark Stranger. How true this is remains unclear, but given Katz's comments about the movie's climax not being filmed, it's certainly a possibility, and I wouldn't be surprised if his reveal as the Dark Stranger was intended as a kind of twist-in-the-tail ending that would see Arletty finally lose her grip on her sanity. Arletty is eventually released from Point Doom, sent by the newly returned Dark Stranger out to spread the word of his coming and to preach of his new religion. But of course nobody believes her, and the movie ends with a final monologue from her as she sits in the garden of a psychiatric hospital. She explains that during the day she is allowed out with the others, and they simply sit and wait. But at night she walks the empty hallways, trying to find somebody to listen to her warnings and repeating her coda from the opening, that they'll take you one by one and no one will hear you scream. Now, like many films of the era, it's possible to see Messiah of Evil as social commentary. I always like Tolkien's view, that a work isn't always allegorical, but, from the point of view of the reader, can be applicable. And I certainly see a number of threads here that could be seen as applicable. From the idea of people still visiting supermarkets after death as a commentary on mindless consumerism, to the idea of the norm attacking the outsiders, especially those of a bohemian or artistic bent, representing a society that refuses to accept the different. I also see a parallel in the way in which the Christian Eucharist, the metaphorical body of Christ, is seemingly parodied by the Dark Stranger's urging that his followers consume human flesh. For Christians, the Eucharist grants everlasting life, but here the eating of the flesh by the locals grants them a twisted version, an undeath eternal with them constantly waiting for the return of their Messiah. We could go on, as there's certainly a lot to unpack here, but I think that's secondary to the main thrust of the movie, in that it's a damn good, creepy nightmare of a movie. So if you're a fan of slow, nightmarish, and at times abstract filmmaking, then Messiah of Evil will check a lot of boxes for you. It's a wonderfully off-kilter, disturbing, and layered movie with great performances, an incredible dreamlike atmosphere, and some genuinely chilling set pieces. Perhaps all the better for the fact that much of the movie is left up to you to decide what is actually happening, and the obtuse narrative actually makes for a better movie, simply because it refuses to explain what it's about. Perhaps because the entire thing is a living nightmare, and it simply can't. And on that note, thank you very much for listening, I hope you've enjoyed this, and I will see you on the next episode of Real Obscure. Real Obscure was created, written, produced and best boyed by me, Kevin H. Shaw. Our theme tune, Fu Manfred und Siggi, was written using Udio, as was our background theme, The Monster Dub. You can learn more about Real Obscure by visiting our website, realobscurepod.com, or get in touch with us by emailing hellorealobscure@gmail.com. Please be sure to like, share, subscribe and comment, or leave us a review. Thank you. Content from Messiah of Evil is used for educational and commentary purposes under Section 107 of the Copyright Act, Fair Use, and remains the property of the respective copyright holder, presented here for the purposes of critique, commentary and discussion. No copyright infringement is intended, so please don't sue us.
Bye.